I assume at least there's a few of us watching, gathered around computer screens and TVs, for the celebration of the Holy Mass. And we're probably wondering, looking at what's going on in the world, because this is a tough situation for every last one of us. It's challenging. And I think sometimes the temptation is to kind of lose hope or to wonder what God is up to, or even to question him. And, it's always good to wonder what God's up to, because what that does is it shows a certain engagement with the Lord. It shows a certain faith and trust that he's up to something. And I don't have any answers hard and fast on what God's up to, but anytime we face any kind of a share in the cross, we know that the resurrection always follows. And we also know that whenever God allows any kind of evils into the world, it's always to bring out a greater good than what would have taken place if the evil had not been allowed. And that's stealing a little bit from St. Thomas Aquinas. So whatever we face, as we kind of wait and see and watch and pray and see what's going on with the Lord, with the world and with the COVID virus, we know God's up to something really good. He's going to bring something good from all of it. Even though he doesn't directly will sickness and illness, we know that he can bring something infinitely better out of it than anything we'd even be able to imagine on our own. And I think our scripture really gives us something to think about today, because our readings remind us that God does not see as man sees, and that we see in the gospel the man born blind. Now, being born blind was a sign of being born totally in sin. So in a sense, because we all are born into original sin, this is something we can relate to. So in a sense, we're all born spiritually blind. But our faith really gives us something to hold on to. Our faith in the Lord really gives us something to focus on, because it's in the light of Christ that we begin to see what's what. We begin to see what God is up to. Already over this last week, half a week only, I've seen people really growing in their personal devotion, really looking for ways to sanctify and make holy the day. And if anyone happens to be watching us right now, that's exactly what you're doing. You're making the day holy, taking that time and really setting it aside for the Lord. And as even though it's not the ideal circumstance, that's a good thing that the Lord is bringing out of it. He might be bringing us to a deeper devotion and a deeper faith. And even recently we saw the Holy Father, Pope Francis, inviting us all to pray the rosary together at the same time throughout the day, throughout the world. This was just a few days ago. And this is something I think is another thing. Now, we also know from any kind of trial or struggle, and having been deployed to a combat area, there's something about that suffering and that struggle that brings about a common purpose. So it really does unite. It unites us and really helps us to grow, in this case, closer to the Lord, and to grow in our faith with him. Now, some will probably notice that, while we're going on through the kind of this quarantine season, I'll be celebrating the Mass, as they say, ad orientem, and some people might say, well, you're turning your back on people. It's like, no, it's exactly the opposite. Because this ancient practice in the Church, and up until the 1960s, this was actually the norm. What this actually does is it symbolizes the priest as standing before God with his people. It's basically a church way of saying that we're all in this thing together. And I thought it particularly appropriate because when we get right down to it, even in the day-to-day life of faith, we're all in this thing together. So I encourage all of us to take this really as a chance to really, pray for each other, support each other, check in on those who may not be very mobile normally, to take care of family and friends. And I know we're encouraged social distancing, but I really don't like that term, because social distancing, isolation is that's at least psychologically and from the perspective of faith, to cut ourselves off from the community is actually unhealthy. So practice the physical distancing. Don't absolutely follow the guidelines. Stay 6 feet apart, but absolutely stay in touch. And use various platforms, technology. Use the cell phones, the Facebook, the texting, all of that. Just stay in touch with people. Pray for each other, encourage each other, and one way or another, we'll see what God is up to. But we can know with faith that He's up to something really, really good through all of this.